Have you ever wanted to be a king? Serious question. Have your stompers rubbed, grapes flinged into the back of your greasy throat, gestures to do your homework, heck, unlimited gems, FIFA points, and V-Bucks? Well, what if I told you that's all possible? I'm not saying it's probable, just possible. Take a certain French lawyer for example. This man, this majestic, breathtaking specimen that we call man, did exactly that. Came down to Chile in the 19th century and proclaimed himself king of the fierce Mapuche, with their consent. Just imagine the amount of 99 charisma this man must have had to, without even lifting a finger, become the king of the very same people who have been fighting, and successfully might I add, conquistador and European colonialism for centuries. Meet Antoine de Tournon, the man of my dreams. Did I just say that? Fuck it, who cares? This guy's the definition of Sigma male. Did what all men dreamt of and got mocked and declared insane while doing it. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Where do we start? Ah yes, France, the land of onions, cat piss, and kings. King Orélie-Antoine I de Tournon was born on the 12th of May, 1825 in a minuscule little village in the southwest of France called Chorgnac. Now he grew up here, nothing much, was usually bored, so started reading books about history and geography. One of these books included La Araucana, a legendary poem about the century-long war between the Mapuche and the conquistadors. Now if there's something to know about this book is that it slaps and was probably the trigger of a childhood dream of his. A dream that had something to do with the Mapuche, maybe be their friend or something. He didn't know, but what he did know was that the Mapuche were fucking cool. I mean, look at Lotaro, an ex-Spanish slave who killed his master in battle, Valdivia, who also happened to be the conqueror of Chile, and Galvarino, a Mapuche warrior who got both hands cut off as punishment for rebelling, so, being the madman he was, tied knives to both of his wrists to become the real-life Wolverine. Wow, Marvel. Cultural appropriation. Not cool. Yep, that's Antoine for you. Some children dream about going to the moon or bringing their pet to school. Nope, not Antoine. He wanted to become the king of these legendary warriors. But again, childhood dreams. When do we actually realize them? Right? Antoine grew up to be a respected and very ambitious lawyer and even opened up his own office, but he knew that this wasn't his true calling. Nope, it was time for a career change. So in 1857, at the ripe old age of 32, Antoine said goodbye to practicing the law and hello to royalty. The madman sold his very comfortable office, liquidated his assets, and convinced his family to borrow a large sum of money for his coming expedition in Chile. Now, back to reality. For a journey such as this, as you would imagine, there are, how do I put this? Many obstacles. Here, let's state the more obvious and pressing ones. The Monroe Doctrine, which was an American foreign policy that basically stated no European countries were to found new colonies in all of the Americas. But don't worry, Antoine had that one covered. This wasn't a colony, this was a kingdom. Big difference. 2. Chile and Argentina. They were literally licking their lips looking at those regions. And finally 3. The biggest of all, the Mapuche. In what fucking world would they consensually, without force, elect this random European man king after fighting against that for 3 whole centuries? Well, apparently in this one. Basically, the chances of the Statman getting 10,000 subscribers were greater than him becoming king. And that means a lot. To try and maybe make sense of all this, let's talk about his stats. He had 92 law and 95 rhetoric respectively, 2 stats which would prove to be incredibly valuable in the future. And pair that up with the charisma, and you can already start to see why the Mapuche elected him. Seriously, the man was definitely dedicated to the grind. You gotta respect it. Anyways, after a long trip, Antoine finally arrived in Chile and was one step closer to the promised land. He decided that maybe it was time to learn Spanish and network around the capital of Santiago. While he does that, we should definitely talk about the Mapuche. The Mapuche would rather die warring than in a bad peace. The Spanish learned this the hard way in the Roca War, where both sides matched each other's brutality. Trust me, Galvarino's hands weren't the only thing getting stolen. Now, with all this conflict and violence, the very respected Mapuche shamans apparently predicted that a white man someday would eventually bring them peace. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Antoine was white. And a man. 99 prophecy. Anyways, this war lasted an entire century until they eventually signed the Treaty of Quilin in 1641, which pretty much established the Mapuche to the south of the Bao River and the Spanish to the north. This makeshift border would last for 2 whole centuries. Truly poetic stuff, but that was the past, 200 years before the king was even born. And with the introduction of modern arms and new South American states hungry for expansion, the region south of the river was free real estate, and not to mention profitable about real estate, Araucania was extremely rich in natural resources to say the absolute least. And plus, look how ugly this looks on a map. Chile was getting ready for an invasion. Oh yeah, Antoine, what's he up to? What? He's meeting with a Mapuche chief. Yup, he did it. The madman did it. After 2 long years, he finally came in contact with the Mapuche. He explained his plans in a few letters and managed to strike a meeting. And my god, did he dress the part. The lawyer was absolutely dripping from head to toe, with a royal costume made from a finely, intricately woven black and white poncho, topped off with a clean silver belt buckle to carry his royal frame, spurs to impress the horse enthusiast, and finally a sword in a sheath inlaid with the finest of gold. 99 drip. The king was not leaving anything to chance. The chiefs were definitely impressed by his stats, which eventually solidified their hopes and won them over. Now, it's important to note that that charisma stat may have included a promise of French arms and aid in their coming fight against the Chileans for independence, even though the man didn't have really any sliver of support from Napoleon III, Emperor of France. Okay, look, what you did is cool, but no. But I mean, come on, this is Napoleon III we're talking about, the man who invaded Mexico in 1861 around the same time that this was all happening, and established an Austrian monarch to rule over Mexico, who funny enough ended up being incredibly progressive, abolishing serfdom and child labor, but ended up getting executed because Napoleon III had to dip and bring his troops back to Europe. Anyways, my point is, with this in mind, was French/Napoleon support really that much of a long shot? Well, I'm sure Antoine didn't think so. Nevertheless, that was a problem for another day. And with the chief's consent in a great Mapuche assembly, Antoine was elected king. How do I look? How do I fucking look? Clean as always, my man. Oh fuck, why did I take this off? Okay, we accept your help. He proclaimed himself king of Araucania and created a constitutional and hereditary monarchy. That is if anyone in his family actually wanted to be the heir. Seeing that the man was an entire ocean away from France and WhatsApp wasn't created until 2009, he had no way to directly ask them. He officially proclaimed his kingdom by one decree on November 17th, 1860, and again 3 days later when the Tuolche people of Patagonia also wanted to jump on the autonomy train. The just 35-year-old Antoine de Tournon, who was also a lawyer 3 years ago, was now officially Orélie-Antoine I. I mean, take officially with a grain of salt, nobody recognized him or his kingdom, but as the great man said himself, weren't we the Araucanians free to bestow power on me, and I to accept it? And accept it he did. He had 4 separate coronation ceremonies. I'm king. I'm king. I'm king. Okay, 2 times. 3 times maybe, but 4. 4 fucking coronation ceremonies. I'm king. Hey, if it's the price to pay to get some international recognition, let him have 10 for all I care. But right to work the king went. He appointed Mapuche ministers of agriculture, education, and defense, just to name a few. But the king was missing something, a capital. So he chose the humble city of Percuenco and started minting coins with the name of New France. Now that all the basics were settled, there was still just that little problem of recognition. So, being the clever king he was, he sent his kingdom to many newspapers, and wouldn't you know, he got some recognition. Good stuff, for the wrong reasons. Oh, he was ridiculed and mocked and deemed insane, and even called the available king by the French media. And this happened. Yeah, that's gotta hurt. Deeply saddened by this, seeing that he was also doing this for the glory of France, the king was perplexed. But you know who wasn't perplexed or even slightly amused? The Chileans. They decided enough was enough and finally formally invaded the non-recognized kingdom in 1861, calling it the occupation or pacification of Araucania. And just a year into the fighting, the king was already captured, and it's not the capturing that's so tragic, it's the way he was captured. He was double-crossed, sold out, snitched on by his trusted right-hand man and servant, Rosales. Wait, how did you even find me? Rosales. With that, the 2-year-old kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia, which was built upon trust and hopes, was abolished by betrayal. The Mapuche were left alone to fight a ruthless war of supposed pacification with no ally and French military aid. And as far as for the king, he was to endure a good 6 months of torture/trial. Miraculously, the king was deemed insane, escaping the death penalty by a hair and getting firmly booted back to France. Now, was he truly insane, or was he just a clever lawyer playing his cards right? Or even further, did the Chileans not kill him in fear that it would have given the Mapuche international recognition? We will never know. but I hope and think he was ready to take that kind of responsibility for his people. He was greeted back in France as a penniless jester, a punching bag if you will. Oh my god. And even his own family despised him for, getting them bankrupt and putting them heir to a throne they didn't want, blah blah blah, normal family stuff. The king didn't have time for such bullshit. He went to reclaim his throne 3 times. The first time was quite the awkward moment because after 7 years in 1869 the Mapuche heard a rumor that he was dead, but there he was in the flesh with all his beauty. The Chileans offered a bounty on his head, but the Mapuche were not having any of it. They stood beside their king not as subjugated peoples but as free, independent equals. Sadly though, after 2 years he had to leave because the royal coffers were running dry. The second time he arrived with actual support and weapons from French entrepreneurs, but was quickly recognized in Argentina and once again firmly booted off the continent. And finally the third and hilariously disastrous last time in 1876. It's important to note that at this point his health stat would have been in the negatives. So anyways, he got recognized by some goons, robbed and stripped of all valuables, then later dropped unconscious, got performed life-saving surgery in a hospital where he was once again extremely firmly booted off the continent. Surrounded by misery, the once king was now broke and dying with no clear heir. When he announced he was seeking a bride, it's safe to say no woman wanted to join the royalty. He found himself at his nephew's house, the last person that still cared for him, with his family hating him, 26 family, France mocking him, and the Mapuche losing the war and their independence. The once king Orélie-Antoine I of Araucania and Patagonia, who stood tall in the Patagonian forest, meeting and connecting with respected Mapuche chiefs, was now a bedridden, mocked-at 53-year-old man, dying alone and breathing his last breaths in a world that wasn't fit for him to be a king. He passed his throne down to a friend and a fascinated wine merchant and died on the 17th of September 1878. One may say, well, you play stupid games, don't be surprised when you win stupid prizes. Well, Antoine would argue, what happens when you're surrounded by stupidity? And the statman would argue that stupidity grants you a very respectable 90 overall rated card. Now, don't get me wrong, as interesting and downright crazy this story all is, there just isn't that faff, that X factor that grants those special historical characters that 91 plus rated card. You know what I mean? The Mapuche lost their independence and are still struggling today. He died penniless, despised by his family, and France just wasn't at its best. But then again, the man's true intentions and motivations will never fully be known. But if there is something to take away from all this, kids, make sure to follow your dreams and ambitions no matter how much chaos and distraught it may cost you, your intermediate family, and innocent bystanders. Thank you. I've been the Statman, and keep on rocking.